Hello and welcome to Fast Forward Newsline. My name is David Kattenberg. With us today, once again, is Sara Aronson to talk about a project here in Winnipeg to bring in some Yazidi refugees who are an interesting community in Iraq and that sort of borderline between Iraq and Syria. Canada, the Trudeau government, before they came into power, promised to bring in 25,000 Syrian refugees, and I believe that number has been raised since then. But among these are not the Yazidis. There are no Yazidis in this group. Sara, tell us about Operation Ezra in a nutshell. Quickly, tell me what Operation Ezra is here in Winnipeg. And then we can talk a bit about the Yazidis and then move back to Operation Ezra.
Okay, for sure, Dave. Well, Operation Ezra is a project from basically it's an initiative of the Winnipeg Jewish community in conjunction with Christian, multi-faith, Yazidi, and other partners. And the goals of Operation Ezra are to bring in Yazidi refugee families who are currently living in camps in Syria and Turkey, and also to raise awareness of what's happening with the Yazidi people in Iraq.
We've heard about the Yazidis in the news. They've been victimized in the most atrocious way by ISIL, Daesh. Tell me about the Yazidis. Who are they?
For sure. Well, the Yazidis are an ancient Kurdish-speaking people with their own distinct religion, and their religion combines elements of the Abrahamic sort of faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and also Zoroastrianism. And it's a little interesting. It's different because it doesn't actually have a holy book. So there's not a Bible or a Torah or Quran. It's an oral tradition, and the Yazidi people pray to Tasi Melek, or the peacock angel, and the idea is that this angel delivers their prayers to God. And because Tasi Melek, the peacock angel, was actually in mythology, was originally cast out of heaven, was basically a fallen angel before being forgiven by God. They have earned basically a slanderous reputation as being devil worshippers. And so their neighbors in northern Iraq or Kurdistan, where they're from, have persecuted them for many, many years.
So they are neither Muslim nor Christian?
No, they're not Muslim, they're not Christian. Their religion is completely different, distinct. In fact, you can't even convert to their religion. People are born as Yazidis.
Do you have any idea how large the Yazidi population is in this region between Syria and Turkey?
Well, that's a story all its own. Right now there are about 700,000 Yazidis in the whole world. There were originally 23 million of them, 750 years ago, and they have recorded over 70 massacres in their history. So we're talking 700,000 remaining in the world now, and I think about 500,000 are still in Iraq. A few 100,000 of those are internally displaced. There's 100,000 or so in Europe. There's 100,000 in refugee camps right now in Syria and Turkey. There's 2,000 or 3,000 in the United States, and there's less than 500 in Canada.
So tell me about Operation Ezra, which is a Winnipeg project currently underway to bring in Yazidi refugees into Winnipeg.
Sure. Well, Operation Ezra was started by some people within the Jewish community. It was originally a grassroots initiative, started when Nafia Nasso, who's a woman from the Yazidi community, came and talked to a group. And in this group was Michel Aziza, a Winnipeg businessman. And he was just so moved by the plight of the Yazidis because, and I didn't get into this, but most recently ISIS has been persecuting them in their homeland, the Mount Sinjar region. There was a massacre in 2014, and at that point, what happened was they had to leave. They have nowhere to go back to, and so basically, and even if they were to go back and try to rebuild, they would not feel safe just because of the history of persecution. So he heard this story, and it just reminded him and other Jewish people of what was happening with the Jews 80 years ago. And so originally their idea was, well, maybe we'll sponsor 1 or 2 Yazidi refugee families. And it just grew into this initiative. And now we have several organizations. We have Winnipeg Jewish and Child and Family Services. We have Charismatic Synagogue, and we have the Pembina Mennonite Fellowship in Morden, and these organizations are all sponsoring families, and the
Yazidi families.
Yazidi families, yeah. So there's 7 Yazidi families that they're sponsoring.
And it's an enormous challenge to get the paperwork done and to make this happen.
Of course, yeah. And the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg is doing coordination and fundraising for this. And Mennonite Central Committee is actually the formal sponsorship agreement holder. And so there's a lot of work been going on. They've been raising money. They've raised quite a bit of money. It costs about $5,000 per person to sponsor refugees. They've raised about $250,000 to date, and they've had donations of furniture, of beds, of clothing, of household goods from different businesses, even donated warehouse space. So they have everything they need. They've had volunteers, but what the situation right now is they're just waiting on this extremely long and drawn-out immigration process. There have been some interviews, there's been some screenings, but even though they applied in September or October, they didn't have their first interview till January, and now they're still waiting, and the families are starting to get quite worried.
Are the Winnipeggers in touch with these Yazidi families?
Yeah, they are in touch with them. And
how? Do you know? By email, by telephone?
I am not sure how they're in touch, but I do know that Nafia Nasso, I think she has relatives over there, and she's telling me that the situation, she told me the situation isn't good there. They're not getting adequate food, the housing situation isn't good, not enough humanitarian aid, so it's a tough situation, and they have nowhere to go. And
they're in a refugee camp in Turkey or in Syria?
There's camps in both Syria and Turkey, which is kind of ironic when it comes to the Syrian situation, because Syria itself is war-torn. And also because of racism, they have to be in segregated camps. So even in this situation where they're in camps, they don't feel safe.
I can't imagine I guess I can, the enormous frustration that individuals who are trying to do something worthwhile like this in Canada and are trying to move this through the bureaucracy, and it's just an enormous challenge. It's just very, very difficult, constantly waiting. How are the Winnipeggers holding up, and what's their morale? What's your sense of that?
Well, Michel Aziza emailed me the other day, and he told me that they're starting to feel desperate too. The desperation is on both sides. And they've been lobbying the Liberal government weekly. And the government, I think, is aware of the situation, and they're frustrated what's happening, because in the meantime, there's this great program to bring in Syrian refugees, and Syrian refugees, it's wonderful that they're being helped and being rescued. It's taking weeks for them, and meanwhile, it's been over half a year. So they're really getting to the point where they're really getting worried about things. And I think they're just, at this point, they just really want things to happen. They want the government to finish its process. I think it's not exactly clear what all is going on with the process in terms of how complicated, how long it's taking.
Who was Ezra? Very briefly, Operation Ezra?
Ezra, I think, was a biblical figure. There was actually an operation, I think, Ezra and Nehemiah, years ago to rescue Jews that were living in Iraq at one point. So I think historically that's where it came from, and I think someone told me that Ezra means courage.
If individuals here in Winnipeg or elsewhere want to do something to help Operation Ezra, how can they get in touch or help out?
Well, basically, they can email Michel Aziza or Nafia Nasso, and I give you their email addresses.
It'll be posted here at the end of the video.
And there are also some Facebook pages. There's Operation Ezra Yazidi Resettlement Winnipeg is one page, and the other page is Save the Yazidis. And they can get in touch, see what else is needed. At this point, it sounds like a lot of work just really needs to be done with lobbying the government.
Sara Aronson, thank you so much for joining us again.
My pleasure, Dave.
You've been watching Fast Forward Newsline here at the Green Planet Monitor website. We are generously supported by the Government of Canada, the Social Justice Fund of Unifor, the Community Radio Project of Community Radio Fund of Canada, and I think that's it. Join us again next week at this same time in the same box. My name is David Kattenberg. Bye for now.